In this presentation, I want to speak about diagnosis in stochastic systems. Observations give information about the internal behavior of a system. If you are watching some white smoke coming out of a power station, you know it's working and producing electricity. On the other side, if white smoke is coming out of the Vatican, they are not producing electricity, they just elected a new pope. In both cases, due to the fact that we know how those two systems are supposed to work, we were able to deduce some internal behavior from this one observation, the white smoke. There exist many fields of research that are based on the analysis of the observations of a system. In this talk, I'm focusing on diagnosis. The goal of diagnosis is to detect whether a fault occurred within a system. And a fault will at some point occur within a system, either because systems are now extremely complex and contain thus design errors, due to the unpredictability of the environment, or simply due to the obsolescence of the system. Moreover, if some faults are not detected, they may have critical consequences. As such, it's very important to be able to detect the occurrence of those faults. Informal methods. The traditional framework for stochastic diagnosis is PLTS, Probabilistic Labeled Transition System. They correspond to automata enhanced with 3 elements that I will describe step by step. I will also be using this automata representing the behavior of a coffee machine as a running example. So the green part of this automata representing the normal behavior of the coffee machine. The first thing that I need to add to this automata in order to represent this PLTS is partial observation. A distinction between, on the one hand, events that are observable to the user, so whenever the machine takes a coin, makes some noise, gives coffee, that all of this is observable, and unobservable events that are represented by dashed arrows that are events that are purely internal to the systems. Given one run of the system, so for instance the run that starts in Q0, you insert a coin inside, the machine starts and then makes some noise. This run, its observation is only coin noise because the start part is unobservable. The second thing that we need to add is one special event that allows us to describe when a fault occurred. So this special event is the fault represented by the letter F, and a run is faulty if it contains this special event. In the running example, as I said, the green part is the normal behavior of my coffee machine, so this can be translated as the overload event here is the fault of my system, so I replace the overload by this fault event F. The third thing that I need to add are probabilities, and for that I'm taking a page from the book of Markov chain, and I'm adding probabilities to every transition of the system, so that the probabilities exiting one state sums to 1. The probability of one run is the product of the probabilities of every event within this run. Taking the example from earlier, the probability of coin start noise is 1 times 0.99 times 0.5. From the probability of every finite run, we can deduce a probability measure on the set of infinite runs that will allow us, among other things, to describe the probability of the set of faulty runs, for instance. We say that a system is diagnosable if, with probability 1, the user is able to detect faulty runs. More formally, by disclose the set of faulty runs that the user can identify, a system is diagnosable if the probability of the disclosed set is equal to the probability of the set of faulty runs. When that does not happen, it might be interesting to determine the degree of diagnosability of the system by measuring the probability of the disclosed set. Finally, when the system is controllable, it's interesting to look for a control of the system that allows it to achieve diagnosability. So this gives us 3 different problems that are interesting, clearly defined, up to the notion of the disclosed set, more precisely. When can we say that a fault is detected by the observer? There exist, in fact, multiple different notions of this disclosure of a fault. The most natural one is the notion of exact disclosure, and that says that a faulty run is identified when every run that share the same observation are faulty as well. For instance, the observation coin noise is ambiguous in the sense that it corresponds both to correct and faulty runs. Thus, runs that have this observation are not identified. However, any observation that contains burning is disclosing because only the faulty runs can have the burning observation. This notion of disclosure has been studied a lot, and the diagnosability problem or measuring the disclosed set are both problems that have been shown to be in p-space, or p-space complete more precisely, and the active notion, so with control, is x-time complete. Those three results all rely on the fact that we can know whether a run is disclosing by just remembering a finite amount of information, and this finite amount of information is tantamount to the determinization of the system, which implies this exponential blowup. However, this exact notion of disclosure has some important limitation. For instance, look at the PLTS represented here. It has two parts. On the left, you can go to a correct part of the system where you read A with probability 3/4 and B with probability 1/4, and a faulty part of the system where the probability of reading the letters are reversed. Both sides have the same language. As such, no run are exactly disclosing. Every faulty run possesses a correct run that has the exact same observation. However, if a run contains a high proportion of B, then this run is very likely to be faulty. As such, we would want to be able to say the observer detects this kind of runs. The notion of accurate approximate disclosure, which is the one that I will be interested in this talk, says that the disclosed set is the set of runs where the failure can be detected. The failure of a run can be detected with an arbitrarily high accuracy, but and thus can, at some up to arbitrarily small threshold, make a mistake. This notion has been also studied a lot, but unfortunately, many of the papers studying this notion ended up being proven false. That was true up to the point where some results were shown on a related field on the notion of distance of Markov chain were established. So to say a few words on this notion of distance of Markov chains, it considers the framework of labeled Markov chain, which is more or less a PLTS as before, but, except that now every event is observable. We are interested in the measure of runs that have observation in the set E for the definition that I will point below. On the distance 1 problem, ask whether given two labeled Markov chain, M1 and M2, we have that the distance between M1 and M2, which is the supremum over all the infinite set of observations, of the difference of the probability of reading E in M1 and of reading E in M2 is equal to 1, which more or less says that there exists a set of infinite observations that will be read with probability 1 in the first Markov chain, but with probability 0 in the second one. The recent result from Chen and Kiefer showed that given two Markov chains, we are able to decide whether they are at distance 1 in polynomial time. And this result allowed people to solve diagnosability under the accurate approximate notion. Let me say a few words about this result. Consider what we call an initial faulty system, which is a system, a PLTS, where a fault can only occur on the first step. This means that we start in a state Q0, and we can either go to the left in a PLTS that does not contain any fault, or to the right with a fault to a new PLTS. What we showed is that such system is accurately approximately diagnosable if and only if the distance between the PLTS on the left and the PLTS on the right is equal to 1. This implies that the accurate approximate diagnosability is in polynomial time for initial fault system, but in fact, for pushing this idea further on with a more involved proof, we can show that the accurate approximate diagnosability is in polynomial time for any PLTS. The first result of the paper presented in Qest takes again this distance 1 result in order to be able to identify which bottom strongly connected component of the system is allows the system to detect fault on which one does not, which allow us to measure the probability of the disclosed set, and that's how we obtain a p-space complete algorithm for the measure problem. The third problem that I mentioned earlier is the problem of active diagnosability, so being able to decide the existence of a control making the system diagnosable. For that, we are interested in a kind of control which is in a framework called weighted Markov chains. I will not go into full details of this control, but the quick idea is there exists a set of events here, A, B, C, that are called controllable, and at every step the observer can decide which of those events he allows, as long as it does not create any deadlock. In the example presented here, assume that the control blocks the occurrence of a second A. So the first one can go through, but not the second one. Well, first, either you go up with a fault, read the first A, and the second A is blocked, so you need to read the B. That's a possibility. Or you went down, you still read the first A, and now as the second A is blocked, you read the C. So depending on whether you read a B or a C, you know that you are either correct or faulty. The first step to study active systems is to better understand the kind of strategies that are needed for the control. When one considers the exact notion of disclosure, for instance, one could prove that only a finite control of the system was needed, and this finite control was completely related to the determinization of the system. For accurate approximate diagnosability, it does not seem as clear, in particular due to the fact that you need infinite memory to remember whether a run is closed or not to be disclosing. However, some result can still be said, and that's one of the important things that I want to say in this talk. First, we can limit the strategies that we consider to deterministic strategies. And for that, I want to point to the important paper Randomness for Free that allows to remove randomness from an important class of games. PLTS, even with control, do not fall within the framework of the paper Randomness for Free, but the proof contained in the paper can be adapted in order to obtain deterministic strategies for diagnosis. The second thing is that even if we need infinite memory to identify a fault, we don't need infinite memory for the strategy here. And as such, we were able in the paper to express exactly the memory that the strategy will need, and the proof that we are using takes some ideas from some existing papers that I quote here. For instance, the paper from Gimbert and Zionka that show which kind of game you can play optimally without any memory. So now that I've got those two results, I am able to build a new system where the optimal strategies can be assumed to be both deterministic and memoryless. That helps a lot. In particular, this gives us directly a naive nx time algorithm, which would be to guess a deterministic memoryless strategy, build the exponential PLTS that is induced by this strategy, and then check the diagnosability of this PLTS. However, however, I can do better than an next time algorithm. We can in fact show that accurate approximate diagnosability for active system is X time complete, and for that we need an efficient construction of a good strategy, which is achieved through a fixed point algorithm that starts from the most permissive strategy. And the quick idea of the step of this fixed point is that in a bottom strongly connected component of your PLTS, you want the most permissive strategy that you can have. So you build the strategy that is the most permissive, you see which bottom strongly connected components are bad for your system, and you cut entirely those, you restrict your strategy to cut those BSCC from the system. Okay, so to summarize, the result of this paper allows us to complete this array of results on feeling in particular cases about accurate approximate diagnosability. What would be interesting to look for right now is how to mix the measure part and the control of the system, because unfortunately mixing quantitative problems, probabilities, and control very quickly leads us to undecidability, and in particular to the emptiness problem of probabilistic automaton. So we have to be careful with this kind of problems. And the notion of accurate approximate problems has been pushed also for related notions such as opacity, but it could be interesting to see what it would give when relating it to other notions such as prediction, degradation, and so on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so questions. There is one question from
a panelist, Carlos, I guess.
Yes, it's something that came to my mind when I saw slide 11. These PLTS, they should always be all the branching from a state should be probabilistic, so the probability should add to 1. In slide 11, 2 of them had the number 1, so they add up to 2. Is this a typo, or are you allowing non-deterministic?
So slide 11 most likely was one of the active systems, so that's why I did not want to go into the details for them, because they are not PLTS anymore. The value on the transition are weight, so that once you add a control that limits which transition are allowed on the next step, you can deduce which probabilities you get. Because, for instance, if you had two exiting transition with weight 1, then in your when you build the PLTS, you get 2 transition with weight with probability 1/2. But if one of the 2 was killed by your control, then you've got only 1 transition with probability 1.
Okay. This caught my mind because I was thinking whether these results exist in the world also of non-determinism. So for MDPs or any other model that allows non-deterministic transitions. That was my real question, actually.
So, which kind of results exist for non-deterministic systems?
For this kind, for the final table that you showed, is there anything similar if, let's say, for MDPs or any other kind of model that has also non-deterministic transitions on top of probabilistic ones?
I'm getting a bit lost between the non-deterministic and the. So you still want so something that is closer to POMDPs or something that is purely non-deterministic?
Maybe I am confused myself, so I will ask you offline rather than.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, please.
Well, actually, I had a similar question. So I thought there must be a relation to partially observable MDPs and work on in this area. So I was just wondering whether, I mean, there are some similar results in that community.
So that's one of the problematic things in this field, is that we have many different models that exist and that are very close. the weighted Markov chain models that I use here are strongly related indeed with POMDP. So the problems that is described here could be translated into a POMDP problem, but this exact problem was not published there. But there exists some very slight modification, for example, for opacity of this model that have been studied, and that are in between for MDP and POMDP, for instance. So you end up with a lot of different models there that are hard to compare with more traditional ones.
I also had a question about this fixed point iteration. So I know value iteration for MDPs. So it's some variant of this. I mean, you explained that you cut away the BSCCs, but yeah, I guess I mean, from the idea similar to some value iteration also.
It's hard to relate it, at least in my point of view, to value iteration. It's more like you look at the structure of your system, and you start with the most permissive strategy. And you can identify some bottom strongly connected components that no matter what you do, no matter how you restrict your strategy, any run that any faulty run that will reach just bottom strongly connected component will not be able to be identified by the observer. So once you show that you cannot do anything there, you know that you need to build a strategy that will remove entirely this bottom strongly connected component. So you take the most permissive strategy that allows to remove that part of the system. And once you've done that, you created new bottom strongly connected component, of course, because you change entirely the structure of your system. And so you repeat this again and again. And at each step, you are removing parts of your system. So that's how you end up with a good number of steps.
Yeah, okay, so this is different. Okay, thanks. Are there more?
Every step of the system has to rely on the p-time algorithm to test diagnosability of a system. So that's why I'm saying it's a bit more complicated.
Okay, I see. So further questions? So if not, I think we should go to the next presentation, which is by Karina Pilsch, Stefan Schupp, and Anne Remke, optimizing reachability probabilities for a restricted class of stochastic hybrid automata via flow pipe construction.
Hi, my name is Karina Pilsch from the University of Münster. And in this video, I'm going to present our paper, Optimizing Reachability Probabilities for a Restricted Class of Stochastic Hybrid Automata via Flow Pipe Construction by Stefan Schupp, Anne Remke, and myself. So what is this title about? Given a system model with a specified set of initial states, we are interested in the probability to reach a set of goal states within a fixed time bound. And we consider probabilities since we work on models with stochastic variables, so probabilities. Yeah, and we have models with stochastic jumps that are taken randomly. So the probability of taking such a stochastic jump is given by a continuous probability distribution, which intuitively means that the probability to take this jump increases with the passage of time. Another observation that we have in our models is that there may be several ways to reach a goal state independent of the stochastic jumps, which results in discrete non-determinism that occurs from underspecification in the model. Previous approaches usually over-approximate the probabilities, like, for example, via state space discretization. And in our approach, we instead compute exact probabilities, nearly exact probabilities up to numerical integration. So the approach I will present in the following computes exact state sets and uses numerical integration to determine the corresponding probabilities. since we want to optimize reachability probabilities, we consider maximum and minimum probabilities that result from the non-determinism in the models. We consider a restricted class of stochastic hybrid automata. So I guess most of you know about hybrid automata as a model for hybrid systems with both discrete and continuous variables. So we have a mixed behavior with discrete states, like here 2 locations off and on, and continuous variables, like 2 in this example, which make the continuous part of the model. Since we consider stochastic hybrid automata, we also have stochasticity added to the discrete behavior by using stochastic jumps. And in our model, as a result, we have urgent jumps on the one side and stochastic jumps on the other side. So we can have pre-guarded jumps, which are controlled by pre-guards and invariants, and thus urgent, or we can have stochastic jumps without any guards. And the stochasticity here is associated with continuous probability distributions. So since we have a restricted class, which means that we consider is an extension of singular automata with constant derivatives, and where the predicates from the invariants and the preguards compare variables to only constant values. Like here. Constant derivatives and only constants in the invariants and guards, and also in the resets. We use flow pipe construction, which is the well-known approach from hybrid system analysis. And the idea of flow pipe construction is to represent the sets of reachable states by geometric shapes. Usually those shapes over-approximate the state sets. For our restricted subclass, we are able to represent those state sets exactly using convex polytopes. And so we are able to compute states that are reachable from time delays here on the left side, and for by discrete jumps and stochastic jumps on the right side, using several geometric operations like intersection or convex union. Here we present our simple example from our case study. We consider a tank with some fluid inside, and this tank is filled by a constant inflow. And for the outflow, we have 2 different valves, 1 and 2, which can be opened and closed by a controller. And this controller then has a non-deterministic choice between the 2 valves. And once a valve is open, it stays active for a fixed time, and afterwards it is blocked for a random amount of time. So we have stochastic variables here, and as long as a valve is blocked, it cannot get activated again. So in case both valves are blocked at the same time, we can possibly get an overflow in the tank. So for this model, we are interested in the optimal reachability probability to reach a state where we have an overflow. Our approach mainly consists of 3 steps. And the first step, we compute time-bounded forward reachability using flow pipe construction. So we keep track of the non-deterministic choices and therefore construct the so-called reachability tree. I will explain in a minute. And we have stochasticity added via so-called random clocks, where we have 1 random clock per enabled stochastic jump. Using the reachability tree, we collect paths in the tree which reach to the goal states in the second step. And then we compute optimal probabilities of those paths with respect to different schedulers. and a scheduler intuitively resolves the discrete non-determinism. So he chooses which urgent jump to take. And we consider different classes for schedulers. In our work, we only consider history-dependent schedulers, and we further distinguish between prophetic schedulers, which know the expiration times of the random clocks, and the non-prophetic schedulers who does not have this information. So in the chain model from the previous slide, a scheduler corresponds to the controller who chooses which valve to open, and the prophetic one would have information about the blocking time, and the non-prophetic would not have this information. So from the flow pipe construction, we obtain conic sets for the time successors. This is due to the constant derivatives of the variables. And we thereby treat the random variables that are induced by the random clocks, like clocks with derivatives 1 or 0. So we treat them in the same way as any other continuous variables during the flow pipe construction. As already said, we have two types of jumps. We have urgent guarded jumps. Urgent means that we leave the location as soon as an urgent discrete jump is enabled. So the point in time when the urgent jump is taken is deterministic. And then we have on the other side the stochastic jumps without guards. They are always enabled, and the time when a stochastic jump is taken is associated with the expiration of an enabled random clock. So, and taking this jump globally disables the corresponding random clock. Non-determinism in the model only occurs for the urgent jumps. So we have fixed time point when such non-determinism occurs. And if multiple urgent jumps are enabled, we have a non-deterministic choice. So if we have one location and we have two urgent jumps out of this location, which are enabled at the exactly same point in time, then we here have a non-deterministic choice between those jumps. Within the flow pipe construction, we construct the reachability tree, which is a tree that collects state sets and discrete branchings. The node in that tree represent the time delays and store flow pipe segments. So each node has one flow pipe segment stored, and the edges represent the discrete jumps between the locations. And since we consider only time-bounded reachability, the reachability tree is always finite. In our approach, we determine the sets of reachable states that satisfy a goal condition. A goal condition can be defined via a location or state sets or both of those. In the example on the right side here, we define only goal locations. So if we say that we have reached a goal state if we have reached one of these locations. And then the path in the reachability tree to such a goal state set represents a sequence of discrete jumps for each path. And the stochastic jumps, the value I have, when the stochastic jump is taken, the valuation of the random clock then determines the probability to finally reach the goal state. And what we do is that the state space, first the array state states in the reachability tree contain reachable valuations for the continuous variables, and on the other side for the random clocks. But for the computation of the probabilities, we only require those valuations of the random clocks. So what we do is we project the state sets onto the space of the random clocks. So we obtain the valuations of the random clocks only which we can use for integration to compute probabilities. To determine the optimal path, we treat random clocks differently depending on the scheduler class that we consider. For the non-prophetic scheduler, it holds that every path in the reachability tree corresponds to exactly one scheduler. So each non-deterministic choice introduces a new schedulers. And what we do is that we traverse the reachability tree to get all this, or to obtain all schedulers by considering just all combination of choices that we have. So for each scheduler, we collect the random variable assignment. And then we just compute probabilities and maximize or minimize the probability by just comparing the different probabilities, and then can choose the scheduler accordingly. So for a better understanding of the scheduler, I just give a simple example. In this model, which already has tree structure, we have a non-deterministic choice at the top. So the non-prophetic scheduler can either choose to go to take the transition A or B. So there are two urgent jumps, and on the bottom we have two go locations. And here we have two stochastic jumps, which are taken when R0, the random clock R0 expires. And on the other sides, we have an urgent jump, which is taken when the continuous variable X reaches a value B, constant value B. In case that the scheduler chooses A, we reach a goal location when X reaches B before R0 expires. So this happens first. And in case we choose B, this is vice versa. So we reach a goal state when R0 expires first. So if we assume now that the probability that X reaches B first is greater than the probability that R0 expires first, then in this case, the maximum non-prophetic scheduler would choose A, and the minimizing non-prophetic scheduler would choose B, because the maximizing wants to reach the goal state, and the minimizing wants to avoid the goal states. The prophetic scheduler instead can optimize the decisions based on the past and future values of the random variables. So in contrast to the non-prophetic one, it can make its decisions dependent on the random variables, like for example on R0. In the maximum case, the maximizing prophetic scheduler aims to consider all possible options to reach a goal state, which is obtained by taking the union over the clock into clock valuations. And the minimizing prophetic scheduler only wants to consider those goal states which cannot be avoided by any decision. This corresponds to taking the intersection of the clock valuations. So again, the example we have now replaced B by another constant C on the right side. So we have different constants that the variable X is compared to. And if we assume that B is smaller than C, then in this case, the maximizing prophetic scheduler is always able to reach a goal state. So dependent on the value of R0, it can go to A or to B. And the minimizing scheduler instead cannot avoid a goal state. If R0 expires when when X lies between B and C. So in this case, the minimizing scheduler or both, scheduler can either can either reach this location or this location, but cannot avoid to reach one of these two locations. In the case that the constant B is greater than C, the situation is vice versa. So the maximizing prophetic scheduler in this case cannot reach a goal state. If R0 expires when X is between B and C. So in this consideration, it would always reach either this or this location. And in this situation, the minimizing schedulers will always be able to avoid goal state. So I hope you can get an idea of the schedulers and why we use union and intersection, the compute prophetic scheduler probabilities. What we then do is to integrate the joint probability density function, which is given by the product of the single probability densities of the random variables, since the expiration times of the random clocks are independent. And then we take the set of clock valuations that we collected, depending on the scheduler that we consider, for which goal states can be reached. And over this set of valuations, we integrate, so we take this at the region of integration. We then use numerical integration, like the Monte Carlo methods. In fact, we use the Vegas methods to compute actual probabilities. And this method also provides a statistical estimate of the numerical error that arises. We presented the results for the case study of the tank that we considered. We computed maximum optimal probabilities for prophetic and non-prophetic schedulers. For the non-prophetic scheduler, we compared our results to existing approaches. And for the prophetic approach, we didn't find a suitable tool to compare to, but we showed that the prophetic approach is as efficient as the non-prophetic one. And we are happy to say that our results proved to be repeatable. So finally, to conclude, we have presented an approach to compute optimal probabilities for prophetic and non-prophetic schedulers without requiring any discretization of the state set, and we compute exact sets of reachable states for our models, but use numerical integration to finally compute probabilities for which we can estimate the numerical error. And our approaches are proved to have similar complexities for both scheduler classes. So future work will consider also continuous non-determinism to obtain more powerful model classes, like we want to add non-deterministic rates to the derivatives for going towards rectangular automata, and also relax the restriction to urgency and consider non-deterministic German times. Further, we want to consider other state set representations for our state sets, since the computation time heavily depends on the geometric representations and operations that we use, especially for high dimensions. So thank you for watching this video, and then see you on Qest.
So thanks for the nice video, Karina. So questions. So Carlos has a question.
Again, always Carlos. No, it's actually a quite silly question. If you can help me, Karina, understand a bit the model when you say stochastic jumps, maybe I have another idea in my head. But because I saw a continuous variable being assigned a value, and from there you have a stochastic jump that goes to another next region. So what does the stochastic jump involve? Even though you repeated it 3 times, I need it here again.
It's just like, yeah, we have the random clocks, which are like stopwatches. You can imagine them like stopwatches. So they evolve with derivative 1 when they're enabled, and yeah, when they're enabled, they can like randomly get stopped after a random amount of time. So just the time when the stochastic jump is taken, who disables the random clock, is associated with a probability distribution.
Okay, so this would be equivalent, if I get it right, to, for instance, sampling a random time distributed according to a variable and having the derivatives 1 or -1. So when it expires, it jumps.
Yes, this is exactly this, like the same.
Excellent.
But it was easier for us to let them run forwards instead of backwards for the analysis.
Fine. Excellent. Thanks. That makes it much clearer for me. Thanks.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay, so further. So I have a question about something you said at the beginning. You said there are other approaches that use discretization of the continuous space, and then they have some approximation, of course, because they have this error from discretization. And now you do the exact numerical computation, which is, of course, better. I guess this comes at some price. I guess you have, I mean, scalability is an issue, right?
No, the price is that we restrict to this certain restricted class of stochastic hybrid automata at this point. So we only restrict to constant derivatives. And therefore, for this class, convex polytopes are suitable to represent the state space, what the state says exactly. But yeah, if we, and therefore we can compute the exact states and then only need approximation for the integration. But if we extend to like more powerful model classes, this state representation would not be able to represent the state space exactly. So yeah, this is what is done in other approaches.
Okay, but with this restriction, I mean, you don't have this scalability issue, and I mean, compared to these other methods, I mean, they work also for the general case, but at least you are also, let's say, in manageable time. I mean, you can do these computations.
Yeah, I mean, we have scalability issues with higher dimension as well, like all the other approaches, and it heavily depends on the space representation that we use.
General problem then for the whole class of models.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, for sure.
Okay. So another question by Carlos.
If I may follow up on your question, Verena, but then scalability is exactly the same as the method that over approximates probabilities for this restricted kind of model. If I stay in these restricted kind of models, then the methods that you are presenting scales as well as those that over approximate.
Yeah, we didn't find approaches to compare to, like we tried to compare to the Prova from the models toolset. But only for I think the 2 smallest model instances we obtained results. So yeah, we didn't get results for higher dimensions. So our tool was a little bit more efficient, but only for a few more dimensions. Yeah, but we didn't find any other tools who were suitable for comparisons with also having this scheduling approach in it.
Maybe I can add a bit. Thanks, Karina, for the explanation so far. So if you're interested in the technical details, the scalability issue comes from the fact that currently we use a polytope representation, which is not optimal. This is what people who work more on flow pipe computation tell me. So what happens is that we need to use a V representation, which stores the vertices, and we need an H representation, which is about the half spaces, and we need to transfer the one representation to the other, which is very expensive. And I know that Stefan is in the audience and can say even more about this. So the problem occurs once we want to actually compute the probabilities. So the flow pipe computation, I think, is fine scalability-wise. But then once we want to flatten the polytope representation and compute the probabilities with a joint probability distribution, we need to perform some geometric operations which require the transformation between the two representations. And this is currently kind of expensive. So we are looking into using a double representation, which carries both the H and the V representation of the polytopes, but we're also interested in using different state space representations. So not restricting ourselves to the polytopes, but maybe using something more efficient, like zonotopes or whatever. So yeah, there are scalability issues, and I think Karina summarized this quite nicely. They are well within what is to be expected in this kind of work.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for the discussion. So are there more questions? So I don't see any raised hands. So then thanks, Karina and Anna. And we move on to the last presentation by Christina Kolb, Carlos Bude, and Marielle Stöllinger about attack trees versus fault trees, two sides of the same coin from different currencies.
Welcome to my talk on attack trees versus fault trees, two sides of the same coin from different concurrencies. My name is Christina Kolb and I'm working on a postdoc position at University of Twente. I work together with Carlos and Marielle on this wonderful topic about differences and similarities between attack trees and fault trees. But let's first go back to the origins of fault trees and attack trees. Fault trees were introduced in 1961 at Bell Labs, and they were introduced to evaluate the Minuteman I launch control system. Whereas attack trees that are similar to threat logic trees, which were introduced in 1991 by Weiss. And they were introduced to describe threats on computer systems and possible attacks. And when you know this, you see directly also different origin of fault trees and attack trees, because fault trees were introduced really to discover something about safety related systems, where attack trees were introduced to discover bad attacks, really harmful attacks by attackers. And at first sight, when you see a fault tree and attack tree, here we have the fault tree on the left with the blue leaves and the attack tree on the right with the orange leaves. At first sight, they look very similar. You see the leaves, you see the gates G and T. But are they really the same? Or, for example, according to probabilities, is the propagation of probability the same in fault trees and attack trees? For example, when you put probabilities 0.2, 0.4, and 0.3 on the leaves, according to fault tree and attack tree, and we propagate them then from down to top, would they really reach the same value at the top? And also, what about extensions about fault trees and attack trees? What kinds of extensions are there? And maybe there are also extensions that cover both of them, or are a combination of both. And this is all what we want to discover in this talk. But before I go into details about fault trees and attack trees, let me first introduce our team. We consist of Moritz, Stefano, Anna, Marein, Milan, and me. And Marielle is the head of our team. We are the CESAR team. And this is an ERC-funded project. We work on safety and security interactions among others, and also, of course, on fault trees and attack trees. Okay, let's get started. Attack trees and fault trees follow the same modeling principle. Here on the left you see the blue fault tree, and on the right you see the attack tree. And this is a fault tree and attack tree that considers the locked door example, which is a very typical example when it comes to safety and security interactions. And yeah, here you see directly what they have in common. An expert panel identifies a main event of interest, which is the top element. And here on the left for the fault tree you see integrity breakdown, and on the right you say attacker breaches door. And then second, and refines it logically to the level of well-understood basic components or actions, the set of basic elements. And the set of basic elements are, the lowest, let's say, on the lowest level. On the left you have fire, door locked, and door lock fails to close for the fault tree. And according to the attack tree, you have door unlocked, attacker tries door, and attacker forced door. Static attack trees and fault trees have the same syntactic structure. And yeah, this is very important. Right now I'm just considering static attack trees and fault trees, which means, okay, they have, for example, here, what is here, this second point, a logical gate and an OR, but we do not consider a SAND gate, for example, or any other type of gate. So for now, we concentrate on the static versions, and this is AND and OR gates. Yeah, they also have a proper structure like a tree or a duck. For example, here on top A you have the tree, and on B you have the duck. And the visualization, they are graphical formalisms with the root on top, and every child connected to an upper parent by a line. Leaves are circles, for example, these A, B, C, D. And logical gates resemble their electronic circuit counterparts. Attack trees and fault trees have the same semantic and qualitative analysis. We have a structure function. They have the same structure functions, and this indicates whether a set of basic elements triggers the top element of T or not. Then the evidence, the set on which the structure function is evaluated, is called evidence. And for attack trees, it represents the steps carried out by an attacker. So here you see, like I mentioned before, the security argument. And for fault trees, it represents elements that have failed. So failures, and which goes back then to safety. They have formal semantics. ATs and fault trees are coherent. Adding basic elements to evidence preserves its validity, and valid evidence of T is characterized by the collection of minimal evidence. And according to qualitative analysis, T subsumes all ways to trigger the top element. Its computation provides key information on the vulnerability of the system, and for fault trees and attack trees with few elements pinpoints a safety hazard where a few basic failures can trigger a system level failure. The amount of subsets in T can be exponentially on the number of nodes in T. So what we have so far, we have the summary about the similarities between safety related fault trees and security related attack trees. So static for trees and attack trees are mathematically equivalent. They have the same syntax, and their semantics is given by the set of minimal evidence. So this is according to the similarities. But what about the differences between them? And as I mentioned before, okay, the application domain is very different. We had, the safety tree, the security tree, so for tree and attack tree. And I mentioned, okay, they are for safety and security, and thus they have different goals. When you remember the locked door example. And this leads to different attributes on the leaves and also to new types of gates. And I will go to the different types of gates very soon. For example, there's the sand here. You have this table, also which provides an overview of differences between attack trees and fall trees. And for example, for attack trees, you have the sequential end. So first something has to happen before then you have other events to happen. So it's really ordered. This is just an example, but also, and according to extensions, there's something about defenses. Of course, when you have an attack, it also makes sense that you really want to defend the system, so you put defenses in it, which of course does not occur on fall trees. But whereas, for example, in fall trees, there are repairs and maintenance that is important. And the analysis part is of different interest. For example, we will have consider more in terms of probability. So let's get started here. The probability for fall trees and attack trees. On the left, we have this fall tree, again, the blue. On the right, we have the attack tree. And you see the probabilities below the leaves, so 0.2, 0.4, 0.3. And what happens here? How do we calculate the probability? On the left, we calculate 2.2 times 2.4, which is 0.08. Okay, on the right, for attack tree for A and B, how does this work? Okay, this works quite exactly. So this first step is the same. We obtain both when we consider the lower level here with this dark blue and also with the red nodes on the attack tree and fall tree, we obtain 0.08. But what about the next level? And according to the next level, we have something very different, because for the fall tree, we calculate, okay, the probability we had below, so this PG, so 0.08, plus the probability of C, which is 0.3, minus 0.08, so at PG, times then again the 0.3, and we obtain a 0.3.6. Whereas for attack trees, we just say, okay, we do not consider the 0.3. This does not belong to our interest right now, so we stick on the 0.08, which gives a different probability. Okay, then next to the extensions, let's go more into detail about the extensions. I said, okay, what kind of extensions are there for fall trees, attack trees? Maybe there are combinations. And okay, for fall trees, I just pick out some one example. This is the repairable fall trees, for example. There you have the fall tree plus repair boxes. Then in attack trees, you have sand attack trees, so attack trees with sequential ends, for example. And of course, there are also combinations between fall trees and attack trees, because also interdependencies are very interesting. When you go back to this locked door example, let's say you have the door locked, which is very secure against a burglar, but you want to have it open in terms of fire. So there's a contradiction between safety and security. And this is also why these combinations are very important of fault trees and attack trees. And there are different types, for example, the BDMPs, Boolean-driven Markov processes, which are a combination a bit of fault tree, attack tree, triggers, and repairs. And of course, there are also others. For example, component fault trees. Here, this is a nice extension. You see very clearly the blue part on the left, which is the safety part, and the yellow one on the right, which is the security part. And really this door unlocked is according then to both, to the left or to the right, so to the safety and security part, which gives a nice overview, an example of an extension. And yeah, okay, there are these lovely extensions, and but what can we do now with them? And also interesting is how can we classify them? What do they have in common, or what is not common at all in both or in different pairs of them? And therefore, we introduce dimensions. And here we have the definition of dimension. A dimension is an ontology with two or more non-empty classes whose individuals are the formalisms from the table I just presented. A dimensional base D is a finite set of orthogonal dimensions. And here, to explain this definition a bit better, I have here this lovely figure. And here you see different extensions, so RFTs, DFTs, FTs, send attack trees, ATs, attack defense trees, and also AFTs and FT80s. And you see dimensions. For example, there's the dotted line, which separates them. And on the left, you see all related extensions to safety. And on the right, you see all them for security. Or there are also others. For example, there's this black line that starts on the left on the bottom and ends on the top on the right, which separates them in terms of dynamic and static. Because before I said, okay, I said something about static trees that have just this AND gates, OR gates, but also we have this dynamic versions with sand attack trees, for example. And so you have formalisms that are static below and that are dynamic on top. Yeah, and okay, now we have here this table again. And when we now consider these dimensions I just mentioned, so safety, security, static, dynamic, or also single and dual, and we check according to the formalisms, what do they fulfill? For example, the fault tree, just the first formalism there, okay, it's for safety, it's static, and it's single. And we can also consider, for example, the sand attack tree. It's more on the right. Okay, it's for security. It's dynamic because of the sand gate. Okay, it's single. And we also have these combinations between safety and security. But when we consider all those formalisms, we only see for BDMPs that they have, okay, they are for safety, for security, they are dynamic, and they are dual. So this is the only formalism that captures safety, security, dynamic version, and also this duality. And this is a very interesting finding that we have. So let me come to the conclusion. We found out that static for trees and attack trees are mathematically equivalent. And domain ontologies differ. The attack trees and for tree formalisms differ. This goes back to their quantitative analysis. Extensions developed in different directions and classifiable via these dimensions that I just presented. And both for trees and attack trees added dynamic and complementary behavior, but in a different way. And basic elements and security have only two states. Safety can be much more complex. And also very interesting, no formalism merging safety and security includes defenses against attacks. So what is then still left for future work? Because, okay, we have this for trees and attack trees, we have combinations, but I just mentioned, okay, there's nothing with defenses. So nice for future work would be to have something that includes for tree, attack tree, so to capture safety and security, add defenses, and also interaction links that I just mentioned, according to the locked door example, where we have this antagonism between, okay, should the door be locked or should it be open? But before we establish this new formalism that captures these defenses and also interaction links, we start with the next step, and this is to investigate where do these dependencies come from. So where exactly is, for example, this antagonism? And there are also more different kinds of dependencies. Yeah, this will be our next steps. Thank you for listening, and I'm very happy for your questions.
Okay, so that was the video by Christina, and now we have Carlos here for the questions. Ooh. If I don't see any raised hands, I will start. So there was also something about the quantitative analysis that was just like, okay, it's different. There was this example with the probability, so it differs, I understand, but I was wondering, there are techniques to compute probabilities, so I guess they are similar, right? The quantitative analysis techniques from the idea, and so there must be a way to compare also algorithms for the quantitative analysis of such trees.
Yeah, okay, so maybe I go one step back and say how this work started. Can we compare ATs, FTs? Are they different? Yes, we know they are. How exactly? Well, mathematically, they are the same thing. You can compute both things from both. You can use any analysis technique to compute probabilities in any of those. The question is, why do you compute it differently then? Well, because the domain applications are different. So in an attack, an attacker will not go both ways. It will go the most obvious way, the one that gives you the highest probability, for instance. In a fault tree, things are failing all at the same time. They are degrading all at the same time. They are parallel, inherently parallel. So the probability of failure will come from all the branches of an OR gate equivalently at the same time, so as to speak. So then the question was, are there more different than only this one? Does it grow further than this? Well, those are just for what they call static ATs and FTs. They have different extensions. And then we found that these extensions also grew differently because of this root, which was different, the application domain. Since there were different intents in what was being modeled, well, yes, naturally, they grow parallelly in different ways. But sometimes these extensions are actually comparable, right? So this dynamic behavior, this happens, then this other thing happens, is both in failure mechanisms and in attack mechanisms. And then we wanted to compare also these kind of parallel extensions somehow. And to formalize this comparison, we came up with this idea of a dimension. So what I mentioned, just say, okay, instead of saying safety versus security, so ATs versus FTs versus ATs, then are there a different cut line that we can put for dynamic behavior? Well, yes, there is. We have all these formalisms that are purely static. So there is no notion of evolving state. There's only a notion of current state of affairs, and that's it. Versus all these others that have some sort of evolution. Then we also found that there are different comparisons of counter behavior, right? For an attack, you have defenses. For failure, you have a repair, or maybe an inspection that makes some maintenance, etc. And then we just compare this and to see how we classify these different formalisms that exist. I don't know, I will call it a modest contribution, actually, but we found that, yes, actually we can formalize a little bit and make the picture a little bit more clear on how things are now. And thanks to this kind of comparison, we found some gaps there. So I don't know if Christina actually said, she pointed out that BDMPs are somehow special because of what they cover. But I don't know if she said explicitly that even though they can model both safety, security, have dynamic behavior, and also dual behavior because they can model repairs, still they do not model defenses, for instance. So they can have they have a notion of dual behavior with respect to safety. Something fails, it can be repaired, but they do not have this dual behavior with respect to security. So an attack can happen, period. Okay, nice. So there's this little gap to fill and other extensions. It was a long answer for a short question, but maybe to make a different picture of what was presented.
Yeah, I have one follow-up. So for safety, I usually compute something like, what's the probability of reaching a bad state? Now, I'm not very familiar with the security applications, but I thought, I mean, there the goal is a bit different. So I may be interested in, what's the probability that the attacker, is successful, something like this. Yeah. So this seems to be, what you do in the quantitative analysis or the goal is very similar. In both cases, you want to compute some maximal probability of something like this. Okay, so it's not that in security applications, you are more interested in, let's say, the strategy or something like this, and you have to develop a strategy instead of, well, it comes with the strategy comes probably when you compute the maximal probability. So this.
Yeah, strategies are usually not represented in this kind of modeling in attack trees. There are extensions like attack defense diagrams, I believe, by Holger and Marielle as well, where you can actually implement different ways of they have cycles and they are more complex in modeling. So there maybe a strategy plays a more important role. Here, the only notion of strategy is, yes, an attacker will try to maximize instead of running all attacks in parallel because there's perhaps a fixed budget or something like that.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
Please.
Okay, I think there are no further questions. So then thanks a lot, Carlos. And I will hand over to Enrico. So he will tell us more about Qest2022.
Thank you, Verena. I will be very short because the time is horrible. So we are at closure, and I communicate something on behalf of the steering committee. First of all, thanks to the many people who made possible this event, and in particular, I like to thank the PC co-chairs, Alessandro Abate and Andrea Marin, for their excellent work, and the program committee, and all those who submitted and contributed papers, and those who attended. And okay, we have some good signals, and this conference apparently is growing this year. So we are happy of this. I also like to thank Benoit Barbeau. We, the steering committee, we like to thank Benoit Barbeau, who was the general chair this year in a very transparent manner, resulting in the end in a very, very good, excellent organization. Benoit is now entering the steering committee of Qest as current general chair of the conference. And he's doing so together with two new elected members, resulting from the ballots that we had in the last day. We had 4 candidates, and I thank all of them because so having multiple candidates helps participation then in the process. And in fact, we had a significant number of votes and rather an increment with respect to the past year. And in the end, so we had 66 people who participated in the ballot, casting 113 votes. Any one of you can see this because the tool is open and transparent and completely symmetric in what you can see. And so to say, the winners of the ballot in the end are Jos Peter Cathun and Giuliano Casale with 41 and 30 votes respectively. So they are entering now the steering committee, and I'm sure that they will help us a lot. In this occasion, we thank Isabel McIver and Rupak Majumdar, who leave now the committee according to the constitution of Qest, and they leave after 3 years of service. Last person I would like to thank here is also Bill Sanders, and with him also Jenny Appelquist. Because this is the occasion to thank them explicitly for the service that they gave in maintaining the mailing list and the web portal of Qest for so many years, since the beginning of the history of Qest up to now. And this has to end just because only for the reason that Bill Sanders took a different role at a different university, leaving Illinois, and joining CMU with a different role and very challenging. So we moved this to a new management. We hope this was quite transparent to you. Marco Paulieri took care of this transition, and I'm supporting him so as steering committee chair. So last but not least, what will be Qest next year? Next year, Qest will be in Warsaw, in Poland, co-located with Concur and other conferences, as I hope, as this year. The general chair for that edition will be Slavek Lazota from the University of Warsaw. And the PC chairs for the next edition will be Erika Abraham from Technical University in Aachen, Germany, and Marco Paulieri from University of Southern California in the US. So the call will appear as this year in November. A preliminary call and a final call, a complete call will be by December, and then the timing will basically follow us this year, apart considering that next year in Warsaw, the conference will be in the second week of September, which makes some difference here and there. Thank you for the attention. At this time, it's very hard to ask this. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for participating in Qest 2021. It's been a great pleasure to organize this conference. I suppose it's time for dinner. I've toasted pasta 6 minutes ago and like it al dente. I'm going to move on and have dinner. And so enjoy your meal. And thank you everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next year.
Let's hope to see in presence there. So will be the way to restart. In the discussion of the steering committee, someone observed, well, we are going for 4 years in a row in Europe. Actually, the last 2 years were not in Europe, were online. Let's hope the next year will be somewhere, Europe or anywhere else. Okay, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Enrico and Alessandro and Andrea.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good one. Cheers.
Ciao, I leave.